Hello, Bicycle Ben here, and I'm looking at the latest plans to come out from Warwickshire County Council about the new Leicester Road Gyratory that is proposed to be installed on the northeast sort of corner, if you like, of the town's ring road. This is something that's been in development for a number of years and has gone through a number of different iterations of designs, and this is the latest one that's come out in the last day or so. And we're going to have a little close look at what we've got, how it works for active travel, what's good and what's bad, where I think things could change and how I think things could change. To give a bit of context to this plan, we've got a main road here, which you can just about see is labelled Newtown Road, that comes around and goes to Vicarage Street. This is the ring road of the town centre, so we've got the town centre on the inside. The ring road is only about 1.2, 1.3 miles, it's not huge. So you can see this is sort of the northeast edge of that ring road. We've got a major road road bridge that goes over the mainline railway over to here. We've got a train station to the north. We've got a few retail buildings, a car park that's outside of the scope of the scheme, a retail outlet that's just inside the scheme but isn't going to change, and a car park that might get some adjustments to it that serves that retail outlet. On the other side of the railway bridge, just off the edge of this plan, we have a high school, Eton College. We have a potential cycle scheme, a separated cycle scheme that will run on the A47 Hinckley Road, and then will join the A47 Longshoot as it goes down to the A5. And we also have a potential scheme on Weddington Road that heads almost north here, just for a short distance. None of those schemes are in existence yet, but they are on the drawing board and there are ideas to put them in. The A47 schemes, I've heard rumours that they're cancelled. Warwickshire deny that, or at least, that there might be rumours that the Longshoot section further away is going to be cancelled. That's denied by Warwickshire, but we'll see. But there are at least these schemes on the drawing board at the moment. So there's some important context to understand about the area in Nuneaton when we're talking about the redevelopment of this scheme and when we're thinking about specifically active travel. Now, I'm not convinced that active travel is always the number one consideration when these sorts of things are designed. I'm pretty sure it isn't actually, but we do have some considerations for active travel in here, and there are some good little bits, but there are some very questionable bits as well. I'm doing this as live. This is unscripted. It might go on a bit. It might be a bit waffly. I apologise, but we're going to go through it and hopefully get the gist of what I think about this scheme, where its weaknesses are for cycling, and how I think it could be improved. We're going to start off at the north with this spur road here, which is Bond Street and Regent Street. Now, at the moment, this little loop here forms part of the major road network. I think it's the major road network. Could be strategic road network. I get confused between the two terms. I'm going to use major road network just to mean the key route through town, the main road, basically. So at the moment, Bond Street and Regent Street form that. At the moment, it's a one-way route with 2 lanes for all traffic. And no separated cycling. There is a thin painted lane, but you might as well ignore it unless you want to get squished. So that's going to change in this plan. We can see the main road runs now from Newtown Road down to this new roundabout, which doesn't exist at the moment, and then we'll continue out over the railway bridge or down south onto Vicarage Street. So let's look at this spur then, this Bond Street, Regent Street, and see what we've got, because this is going to be a significant change for the area. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and have a little look at what we've got. Hopefully this is going to be clear enough. I will zoom in as much as I can without moving around too much, but let's have a look. So first of all, what can we see with Bond Street? Well, cycling is going to be on the road. That's a sort of alarm bell number 1 for me, really. We're coming up to the train station to the north here. You can just see it outside of the scope of the scheme. And we have cycling on carriageway. Now, my thoughts in terms of this are, if we're going to enable multimodal transport, that is walking, wheeling and cycling plus train, then we need to be enabling that properly for active travel. And I don't think that does it. if you're going to have cycling on the road. Now, to be fair, Bond Street is going to be a lot quieter than it currently is, because we can see we have bus gates at the south side here. So motor traffic isn't coming in, and motor traffic from the north, while it is permitted, isn't going to be going through here. It's just going to be for access to the retail park or to the private road. So Bond Street, and presumably by extension maybe Regent Street, will be quieter than they both are at the moment. But still, if you're riding on the road, you're going to be sharing with buses, you're going to be sharing with the small amount of motor traffic that does still exist there. You're potentially going to be sharing with delivery vehicles for the retail outlet. This is Dunelm at the moment. So, delivery lorries, vans, whatever they use, potentially going to come down here as well. So while many adults might decide that's okay, many are going to still think, I'm sharing with large vehicles here, it's quite intimidating, it's not that much fun. But thinking about families who might want to access the station, who are maybe cycling with children, either with children cycling independently or with trailers or tag-alongs, whatever it might be, I don't necessarily think that putting children into this environment is going to be that comfortable. Better than it currently is? Yes, undoubtedly. If the traffic levels on Bond Street are vastly less than what we currently have, it will be more comfortable. But still, you're asking children to share with large, intimidating buses, potentially large, intimidating delivery vehicles, also cars, which are getting larger and larger. I don't think that's ideal. And I think if you want to encourage and enable multimodal transport between, well, anywhere in town and the station up here to the north, we really need cycling to be on its own infrastructure away from motor traffic. So this is where I think the scheme, first of all, is really letting us down in terms of active travel. How I would change this to enable it? Well, first of all, I would revert it to a one-way system. But I would route the one-way system on an anti-clockwise direction, where currently it's on a clockwise direction. So traffic, all traffic, cars, delivery vehicles, buses that want to access the station, the retail outlet, this private road, they come in off the roundabout here. They're routed along on one single lane, brought around. Those who want to access the station can then turn off if they want. But you can come round, access the retail park through here, and then leave again. I don't see why that should be too much of an issue. I don't see it being particularly busy because it's not part of the main road through town. You're not encouraging people to go that way if they don't want to go to any of those destinations. So it should still be quiet. So shouldn't one lane be sufficient? Laybys, of course, for bus stops, or even just one bus stop, because you're only going in one direction. You don't need more than one bus stop in theory. With the space that is then freed up, you can enable separated cycling to continue on this, and that would be bi-directional. So you have an advantage when you're cycling that you can go either direction on Bond Street or Regent Street, whereas with driving, it would only be in that anti-clockwise direction. You'd also get rid of this roundabout. It wouldn't be necessary because it would just be a simple junction, just like we have the private junction here, or we have the junction for the retail outlet. So it would be a lot simpler. I don't see, off the top of my head, in my non-expert opinion, why that should be a problem. And then you enable much more comfortable cycling right up to the station. Ideally into the station grounds, although the station grounds itself are of course beyond the scope of the scheme, but it would be nice to see that properly routed up to some cycle parking within the train station. So that's my first major red flag with this scheme, and that's how I would improve it. Coming away from major red flags and looking at something that's maybe a little bit more positive, we do see bi-directional cycling going in on Newtown Road, just on the eastern end here of Newtown Road, which leads to questions as to how you leave the cycle scheme if you're heading on a westbound direction. How do you leave that and get to the other side of the carriageway to continue your journey? That's not shown here, so that's a question, and that would need to be answered. But if you're coming from the west and heading east, you're going to be on this side of the carriageway anyway, so that's obviously easy to pick up. So that's good. It's nice to see a bit of bi-directional separated cycling here. We have the junction, fine. and then you come across, and we can continue our bi-directional cycling as we come along and on the sort of the northern edge of the new roundabout. But then it stops, and we end up merging into shared use space for the crossing. There's a few points like this dotted around over the map. You can see this crossing here that we're looking at. You can also see this one down here, or these two, and you've got two down here as well. And you've got this one here, which we've just gone past when we looked at this junction, and you've got potentially this one, although it's not clear. I wouldn't think actually that that's shared use space on that side, so maybe not that one. But just taking this one as an example, it merges people together. It's a point of conflict between people who are walking and wheeling and people who are cycling, but also other cyclists as well. You know, everybody that's going to be using that junction is squeezed together into a small space. You've potentially got quite tight turning angles here as well, particularly if you're heading on a westbound direction. You've crossed the road, and then you need to turn to join the bi-directional route. That looks like it could be quite tight, although when it comes to actual on-the-ground experience, I don't know. Just my impression from the map is that looks quite tight. Don't forget also, you're going to see street furniture here for traffic signals and the crossing signals, which can reduce space further. So that could be quite awkward. And there is no more protected cycling. Once you move further towards the east of this scheme, you're put into shared use space, and then you're stuck in the shared use space as you get to Leicester Road, and we'll come to Leicester Road in a bit. We have a lot of bollards here, incidentally, which I don't quite understand. I don't know why we've got so many bollards along this line in particular. This line here I understand because this is a crossing point to get into the retail park, car park, but this line here, not quite seeing why they're there. So there are a lot of bollards dotted about, and I don't necessarily think that's all that great. It all depends on the spacing, of course. If it's accessible spacing, then okay. If it's not, then that's a problem. But let's just look at this bi-directional cycling, because while I like to see proper separated cycling infrastructure provided on a road scheme, I do think there might be an issue here. This looks like it's bounded by bollards and potentially a guardrail to me, potentially on a small strip of curbing, and then you're right up against the main carriageway as you're going around the roundabout. I don't necessarily think that's going to be very comfortable. Depending on the height of the railing and the bollards, if I'm indeed reading this correctly, it could reduce the effective width of the cycleway because of handlebars. Obviously, you don't want to have the handlebars catching on bollards. So, particularly if you're cycling in a westbound direction, our rider's going to be pushed a little bit towards this central line because of that effective width issue. They might well be. Is it going to be an issue? Depends on how busy it gets. If it gets particularly busy, then yes, that could be an issue. It just reduces the comfort for cycling on that space, depending on the width of the route. And I'm going to assume that that width is 3 meters, because I don't see cycling being given any more than the desirable minimum. But also, it's very, very close to the main carriageway, on a point where you've got, changing directions of motor traffic. You'll see we swoop down here as we come along. If you're heading onto Regent Street, which is a road heading north from this junction, the first exit, you'd sweep up and into Regent Street. So you've got a lot of direction changes here. Is there potential discomfort if you're cycling against that flow? So if you're heading on here on a westbound direction and you've got traffic coming here on an eastbound direction, particularly at night where you've got headlights and bicycle lights to contend with as well, is that potentially a discomfort and potentially a distraction in terms of motor vehicles as well? It's a question I'm going to leave open. I think it potentially could be, but I don't know. But also, how many times do we see examples of junctions where drivers have had a little mishap and they've collided with guardrails or bollards or whatever at junctions, at roundabouts? There's no real buffer here. I don't necessarily know that this is going to provide a huge amount of protection if you've got a lot of cyclists coming this way and then a driver collides with that railing. Although, okay, it's an outlying chance, but it's a chance nonetheless. So I would like to see a little bit more of a buffer between the main carriageway and the cycle route here, and that goes for Newtown Road as well, although of course that is a smaller section. It's more of a feeder section, so maybe that's slightly less important. I think if you're on a dead straight road like Newtown Road is at this point, maybe it's less of an issue because everybody's going dead straight, and really it should be fine. There shouldn't be any problem there. When you've got this changing direction, I think that's when it potentially becomes a bit more of an issue. So I would like to see a bit more of a buffer there. However that could be achieved, I don't know, because obviously we've got the limitation with the car park and bits and pieces. But also, I suppose thinking about it, in terms of this crossing, to reduce the tightness of that turn, even if you did keep this as a shared use crossing, if you could sweep this cycleway through the car park here, so lose this end of the car park, sweep the cycleway through here, through the trees and up, you'd have a less tight turning angle. So you'd be almost buffering up against the retail outlet, okay, but your turning angles would be less tight, and that might be therefore more comfortable. Just off the cuff thought as I'm talking about it. So while I'm pleased to see this here, I think there are improvements that could be made with it. We've got bi-directional cycling here as well as we go past Back Street. This is an access only road, so that's fine. But we can see we've got shared use space at the top and we've got shared use space at the bottom, and this particularly pinches in here, and that's a concern. I don't know why we've got so much in terms of bollards and guardrails here. I think the idea is to stop people driving across from the road, the main road, across to Leicester Road and Back Street here. But I do wonder if this is perhaps a little bit excessive in that regard. I don't know. But we've got limited space here, so I think if those bollards and railings could be removed, that would just free up a little bit of space to make things a little bit more comfortable. Ideally, though, I would want to see if there's a way to move these lanes across to the east a bit, just to provide a little bit more space here, either to maintain the separated cycleway through this area, or at the very least to give a little bit more comfort to people walking, wheeling and cycling where that space does have to be shared. So that's a problem in my view. Again, lots of bollards are showing here. I don't see that all of these, or even necessarily any of them, are required, but it does seem a little bit excessive. Again, we've got conflict point with the crossing, and we come down to a separated cycleway again. So we've got a route that goes from Vicarage Street up past Back Street and then up onto Bond Street, but we've got varying different standards. We've got the bidirectional cycling, then we're down to shared use space, then we're back to bidirectional cycling, back to shared use space, over onto the road. You know, it's a little bit all over the place, I think, is my point here. I would like to see more effort put into maintaining bidirectional cycling all the way through up to the station, and I think there's a way of doing it. We won't focus too much on Bond Street. It's a quiet road as it is at the moment. I don't see that changing particularly, with the northbound lane being only a bus lane, and it's only the southbound lane that is available to any traffic. So I don't see that being a particular issue. Leicester Road and Back Street are going to be quiet roads in a way, because this is for access only. So that's all fine. No real issues that I can think of at this point over there. Then we can get onto the Leicester Road Bridge as it goes over the railway. Now, I want to think about this in terms of broader cycling, so I'm going to zoom out. And we're going to think about routing from Vicarage Street to Leicester Road, and then connections onwards, either up to Wellington or St Nicholas Park, and then down to Attleborough and Whitestone to the south of the town. If you're travelling on a northbound direction from Vicarage Street here, so coming northbound from Vicarage Street, we come up on our protected cycling, we're put into shared use space, but we want to go over to the Leicester Road and head in the northeast direction. Well, we have a number of crossings we need to do to achieve that. We need to cross, first of all, the northbound lanes of Vicarage Street to take us to the central reservation. We then need to do some turns to get to the crossing for the southbound lanes of Vicarage Street. Now it takes us over to more shared use space, fairly narrow shared use space if this doesn't change from what we have already, and we'd cycle up on the shared use space to the next crossing point. Again, if this stays as it is already, the shared use classification would end around here. We would cross, into the central reservation again, and then we would cross again to get to the shared use path on the other side, and then we will be able to cross on the shared use path over Leicester Road. After Leicester Road, we have to rejoin the carriageway because at the moment we have a painted lane cycleway on Weddington Road, but as I say, there's the potential for a scheme to go in on Weddington Road that would continue separated cycling. So we have a problem here. We have cycling that requires 4 controlled crossings, which isn't necessarily going to be that quick to achieve, and also quite uncomfortable if you've got a lot of people around, depending on the time of day, and if we're planning for more people to be walking, wheeling and cycling, which we should be, potentially it could be quite busy. So lots of conflict opportunities here between people walking, wheeling and cycling. And then we get to Leicester Road, where there's no marked improvements to the road at all at this point. So at the moment we have the shared use path on the north side. On the south side we have a painted lane cycleway, which is very narrow. So if you're coming the other direction, you have to cycle on that painted lane cycleway. Narrow space, you will get close passes almost certainly. I speak from experience on that. You come past the junction here, and then you either nip off the road and join the shared use path and then do your 2 crossings to then join Vicarage Street and carry on south, or you just carry on the road, however that takes your fancy. Currently, ignoring this redesign, my preference is to stay on the road because I find it easier. So we've got no improvements to Leicester Road Bridge, and this is a problem because we have the cycle schemes that are going in over this side, which, while I've spoken about them being flawed, they are there. We have the potential schemes going in on the other side of the railway bridge, the A47 Hinckley Road, and potentially Weddington Road as well. Both don't exist at the moment, but they're on the drawing board. Without any improvements to Leicester Road, I see this as a gap in the network, because while we have a shared use path on the north side, it is narrow. I don't consider it wide enough for shared use at all, so my preference is to stay on the carriageway, because I do find you are in conflict with pedestrians when you're going over there. It's quite loud, being a busy main road and by the railway as well, so pedestrians don't necessarily hear you approaching. Even if you ding your bell or you call out, they don't necessarily hear you. So you're in conflict using that path. If you're coming the other way, you don't even have a shared use path. You are on the road, on the very narrow painted lane cycle lane, which, you know, as anyone who advocates for better cycling infrastructure knows, paint does nothing. You will get close passes, it's intimidating, it's still a busy main road, you know, it's loud, it's noisy. Think about, you've got the high scores I spoke about on the other side of this bridge, just beyond the plans. You know, kids needing to cross this bridge, it's not great. It's a really poor experience at the moment, and this scheme does nothing to change that, even though the scheme limit here, marked in the red boundary, does seem to encompass it. So I would like to see something happen here. With all of the other stuff that I've spoken about, I think this is potentially the biggest thing that is missing. We have no improvements to cycling over this bridge, and it needs them. My preference here would be to maintain bi-directional cycling across it. I would do that by removing this central reservation, or at least squishing it right down, but also potentially removing a lane for motor traffic. And, you know, if that's what needs to happen to fit in protected cycling, then I'm afraid that's not what needs to happen. We have this bridge and this bridge alone to facilitate the crossing for everybody of this railway. There is no other bridge nearby that can connect to the Gyratory and to the other schemes that I've spoken about. That would be sufficient. So it's either a case of build a new bridge and a new route, which I don't see as feasible and is most likely cost prohibitive, or you make use of the existing bridge, but you are going to have to reallocate some space. Because at the moment, as we can see, it is utterly motor dominated, and walking and wheeling and cycling is utterly squeezed to the sides. And that needs to be rebalanced. And I know this is part of the major road network. Yeah, okay, fine. So what is my answer to that? If that's the case, that's the case. Well, widen the bridge then. But you're going to have, again, additional costs to deal with that. So that would be my answer. Reallocate space, provide separated walking, wheeling and cycling on the Leicester Road Bridge, and do that properly. so that we don't have a network gap if and when those other schemes on the other side of the railway come about. Even if those schemes don't come about, there's an advantage to doing it, because at the moment, being squeezed to the side on that painted lane as you head towards Vicarage Street, as you come over this way, is a very unpleasant experience. So even if those other schemes don't come to fruition, having something across Leicester Road Bridge that improves the walking, wheeling and cycling infrastructure is still a benefit. So I would still do it. You know, the other parts, they're all important as well. And I wouldn't say choose one or the other. But if it came down to having to choose one or the other to do, I think that would be my focus at this point. Leave the other bits as they are, do the bridge. Now, the only other suggestion I have for how I would improve this is to get rid of these crossing points. These 4 crossing points. How would I do that? Well, I would have grade separated crossings of this roundabout. And to do that, I would lower the level of the road so that you can have bridges across the road, but bridges that are at ground level, so people walking, wheeling, cycling aren't going up and down. And that enables people then to cycle into the centre of the roundabout, across the centre of the roundabout and out the other side, and then up Leicester Road Bridge if that's what they choose to do. Or they could join Regent Street with my idea that it be a one-way thing, so there'd be cycling enabled up Regent Street to connect with the station. By doing that, if this was lowered, you wouldn't need these crossing points, so it has a benefit to motorists because you can get rid of those traffic signals. There would of course be a cost to lowering the road level. This whole area is being redeveloped anyway. This currently has buildings on it. So is it prohibitive? I don't know. I don't know the costs about these things, but you're doing so much here anyway. It's not just the simple realignment of an existing road. It literally is taking buildings out and building something new. So if you're going to do that, drop the level, put bridges in to enable walking, wheeling and cycling to come across and access the station unhindered by the roads, and the roads unhindered by people walking, wheeling and cycling. That seems to make a lot of sense to me. It's not part of this plan. It will be something that I will feed back. I think for now that is the extent of my comments on this plan. As I say, it's gone through numerous iterations over the last number of years. Will it go through another iteration? Will it last even more years? I don't know. It's good to see that cycling is accommodated to a degree in these plans. I do still think it is a motor first plan that doesn't go far enough to enable modal shift in the way that would actively say to people, do you know what? It's going to be easier for me to cycle on a local journey to get to the station than it is for me to drive or to get a taxi or whatever. It's not a scheme that says to people in Weddington that it's easy to get to the station, or it's easy to get to these retail parks, or it's easy to get to the town centre, because you've done nothing to Leicester Road Bridge to enable active travel. As part of improving road schemes, I think there has to be a strong element of giving people a viable alternative to driving, because we cannot constantly say we're going to improve the scheme to improve motor capacity. It doesn't work. At some point, you come up against physical limits. We're already saying we're going to knock buildings down to extend the road network. We can't keep doing that. At some point, we have to say enough is enough. So when you come to doing schemes like this, if you're not fully enabling people to make another choice, I think you're failing, frankly. So I think you need improvements here to properly enable people to say, yeah, do you know what? It'll be easier to walk, or it will be easier to cycle. At the moment, I just don't see it, unfortunately. I think if you grade separate, if you enable people to cross nice bridges of these roads, not, boring, ugly concrete slabs, but nice bridges, I think it improves the area. If money were no object, I'd sink this whole roundabout and have a nice green square. I imagine that's vastly cost prohibitive, but try and make it an attractive place. You're getting people to come in to Nuneaton by train. They come out, what do they see? An ugly retail box, car park, roads, a couple of trees. It's not inspiring. And okay, the roundabout down here is a fair way from the station, and if you greened this area, it wouldn't make a massive difference for your first impressions. But you get my point. It's not inspiring. So I think there needs to be improvements, and I will feed that back. But I know how these things go, and I don't have a huge amount of hope for massive changes, particularly if it involves increasing the cost. Right, that's it. If you've got anything you want to comment, if I've missed anything on this, do please let me know. You can find me on the social medias. All the links for my social media accounts are over on my website. So go to feets.uk/links. That's FIETS.uk/links. You can find me on Blue Sky for my primary social media. Nowadays, I'm also on Mastodon as the second account. Don't bother on Twitter/X. You won't find me there apart from an automated feed nowadays. But yeah, if you want to comment on this, let me know what I've missed. Let me know what you think. Let me know if I'm wrong. Let me know if I'm overthinking this. By all means, comment below in the YouTube comments or drop me a message on social media and let's have a chat. But that's it for now. So thank you very much for watching. If you've made it this far, well done you. And yeah, that's it. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.